When have you seen the real world hit a spoiled brat? I used to repair trails for the Forest Service, and I wouldn't call anybody a brat necessarily, but we are all pretty spoiled when it comes to manual labor and sleeping on the ground point on day 1. The bush plane flies the crew out to a grass airstrip about 40 miles east of town. Then you shoulder your pack, grab an axe and a shovel, and start hiking up the canyon. Usually in the rain point, until you watch that plane disappear over the ridge. It's hard to imagine what you've signed up for. Hard labor all day every day. Working, cooking, and camping in the rain that whole first month. No phone, no mail, no roof, and if you forgot something, you'll just have to live without it until the road opens in July. Wolves and mountain lions circle the camp at night. Sometimes bears come for your food point. Everybody struggles for the first month. You'd see the kid who'd been the hard guy on his high school football team start to sit through lunch with his head in his hands, just licked. Guys who were in the 1,000-pound club at their gym slumped up against a tree all evening, eating peanut butter for dinner because they were too beat to cook. Point demanding as the job was, it wasn't really a physical issue. The best workers on the crew were hippie Jesus types with noodle arms who read Marcus Aurelius around the campfire at night. They just took everything as it came, because no matter what, it just kept coming. Them and the Mormon ranch kids. I don't know how those kids came up, but nothing brought them down. Point edit. If you want to apply for such a job, you can on usajobs.gov. Or you can volunteer through theska.org, or join an AmeriCorps at nationalservice.gov. Good luck. It's actually a lot of fun after the first couple weeks. A kid in college was a roommate of a friend of mine. He was always bratty and spoiled, but hung out with us as if he were a good friend, and we let him chill with us because sometimes he wasn't bad. Then one day we heard him arguing with his mom on the phone that he needed more money. From the ensuing argument we learned that he had, in less than 1 year, burned through 30 grand that his parents gave him for food and discretionary spending. Mind you, he was not paying for tuition or lodging or his car with this money. It was basically just food money, as all those other things were also already covered by his parents. He was calling his mother some really nasty things and hung up on her. Then his father called and they got in an argument, cussing each other out. At the end of that call he threw his iPhone at the wall and shattered it. This was the original iPhone. Turns out they cut him off and basically he had to drop out of school and drive back home, out of state, because he couldn't afford to do anything anymore, and of course was too good to work a pleb's job. He added me on Facebook about a year later, and was a late blooming 9/11 truther. Obama was president by this time, and the only thing I ever said to him on FB was a simple reply correcting one fact he was wrong about in his 9/11 conspiracy theory. He then posted like 4 replies in quick succession telling me to open my eyes, and then blocked me. Simple and pure example for my part. There was only one coffee shop on my campus, operating out of the library building, and it was always crowded. You pretty quickly learned that if you wanted coffee before class, you got there 20 minutes early, grabbed a newspaper, I'm old, sue me, and took your time. It was always funny watching incoming freshmen crowd the line 5 minutes before their 8 AM and slowly filter out in despair as they realized there was absolutely no way they were reaching that sweet Sumatra Nirvana in time. Cue this little freshman girl dressed in the classic campus t-shirt, jean shorts, blonde ponytail coming out the bow cap, starter pack, walking up, assessing the line, stretching out the door, and boldly deciding to just sorta skip it. Now the baristas were usually pretty cool with people skipping for simple things, dropping down a quarter for some scantrons or a buck for a cookie, anything that didn't require interaction. Not this girl. She caught the barista's attention while the previous customer was still paying and went, "Hi, yay, can I get a latte please?" Like really quickly. The line starts back there, replied the now slightly confused girl behind the counter, "But I have class," whined the freshman. There was an awkward pause before the barista responded, "You are on a college campus. Are you freaking serious? Why do you think all these people are here?" Back of the line. "Oh," was the only thing the freshman girl thought to say. As she turned to look at a line full of people staring daggers back at her, she looked not upset or embarrassed, but sort of enraptured by this newfound understanding she's just been imparted. It's like for first time in her entire life she realized that other people were in her way for reasons. It was actually kind of beautiful to watch, like a baby learning to walk for the first time. Better late than never. Oh goody. I remembered this earlier today and was hoping I'd be able to share. Not sure if this really qualifies, but it's a good one. So this gem isn't about a child. This was a full-grown woman, maybe mid-30s, who very clearly was handed everything in life. Spoiled, selfish, entitled, whatever you want to call it. She was way out of touch with reality. So I grew up in a very nice, upper middle class area with nothing but houses for miles around. At the center is a small block with a little grocery store, a few boutiques, restaurants, and a drugstore. It being the only shopping center anywhere around tends to attract really snobby people. Anyway, I was maybe 14 or 15 and went to the drugstore to grab something or other and happened to wander past the makeup aisle. This drugstore is pretty large, so their makeup selection is huge, with every brand you can think of taking up one whole wall of the building. I had just rounded the corner where I saw this woman sitting on the ground, just as I saw the manager coming around the opposite corner making a beeline for her like a bulldog. He stops, arms crossed, and the following happens. Him, ma'am, I hope you know that you have to pay for those. Her. What? Him? The makeup. All of these packages you've opened. You have to pay for them. He gestured about towards where I was standing, still at the end of the aisle. I looked down to my right and saw what he was pointing at. The pressed powder compacts. She had opened one of each shade ranging from ivory to warm beige and left the remains in piles at the bottom of each display. That's right, I said each. She went through every single brand and opened the packaged compacts. And to make it worse, each brand usually makes more than one type of pressed powder. There had to have been at least 40 of them. Agitated. What do you mean? I don't understand. Why do I have to pay for them when I only need one? Him, having a stroke, because you've destroyed them, and because you've used them. We can no longer sell these to anyone else because they've been contaminated by you. Her. Becoming irate. Well, I needed to test them to match my skin tone. It was at this point I realized that, next to all the compacts were the used makeup sponges that come with them, as well as what appeared to be used baby wipes. Him, impending aneurysm. Well, I hope it was worth all the money you now owe us. This was about 15 years ago, so the remainder of the conversation is a fuzzy. I know she was panic crying and was refusing to pay, and he threatened to pay the cops. But I had to leave at that point, so I didn't get to see the outcome. But I do know that I did a little math when I got home. Nowadays one of those compact will cost about $10 each. But back then I'd say 5 to 6. So she had to pay at least $240 at the end of that. My ex-best friend was raised spoiled. His family wasn't very rich, but they still always tried their best to get him everything he asked for and never taught him to take responsibility for his mistakes. He'll write a list of the things he pulled after leaving school. Got 3 strikes on his license and lost it by running a red light. Wasn't his fault because there weren't many cars around. Speeding through a school zone wasn't his fault because there were no kids around, even though he was going so fast that he would have been breaking the limit if the school zone limit wasn't in place. Getting pulled over and one of his passengers wasn't wearing a seatbelt was his fault for not wearing it. Quit his job because he wanted more time to skate. Did this by going to his ex's and sleeping with her instead of going to work, then bragging about it on Facebook. Centrelink refuses to pay him because he's not even trying to get a job, and no place will hire him because of his track record. Sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl at a party. He was 21. Somehow managed to get away with that. Also, this wasn't some massive drinking party, it was a family BBQ. Assaulted a bouncer at a nightclub and then assaulted the police who tried to arrest him. Spent a week in jail for that. Moved to Melbourne, then Sydney, and ended up being homeless for a couple years and is currently homeless in Germany. Will add more when I remember it. Edit. Okay, I remembered a few more. Another time he was skateboarding in a Hungry Jack's car park and a policeman asked him to move on. Not sure how it got to this, but he ended up assaulting the policeman and taken to the station. His family had a friend who was a cop and stuck his neck out to get him released, and he then tried to sue the cop who arrested him for assault. Also, he had a 15-year-old kid with him at the time who was drunk and high, so as well as assault he was facing a charge of supplying to minors. B. Caught a train from Sydney to Melbourne and didn't pay. Thought he got away with it until his mum got a $350 fine in the mail. He never officially moved out. She demanded he pay it immediately. Drove down for the day to ask for money with his girlfriend, and his mother reluctantly gave it to him. A few months later his mother gets a bill for $960 in the mail because he never used the $350 money to pay the original bill. His mother tries calling him but can't get through for days, so she calls his girlfriend and she says they broke up a week after that visit and she has no idea where he is. Also on that same train ride to Sydney his friends abandoned him and he freaked out and got arrested. I took a screenshot of the convo and posted on r/Manipulative Facebook a few years ago and will post the link once I find it. Edit. Here it is. He has posted a whole bunch of pathetic Facebook posts that either beg people for sympathy or money. Unfortunately he deleted these, so I can't find them. I was out at a farm with my cousins for a party. It was more like an afternoon barbecue with all the parents sat talking and cooking while the kids ran around playing. Usual lazy afternoon in Africa. So anyway, I was 16 at the time, making me the oldest of the kids, and I will admit that I was all back of the bus / too cool for school type of cringy teenager and was practicing my casual aloofness. Now there was this German couple there with this absolute monster child, 5, who made it his mission to terrorize all the other kids. The parents of little Adele sat beaming with delight, watching their little ray of sunshine playing with the other kids. Eventually it became apparent that they were going to do nothing about it, and my parents told me to keep my cool and just ignore him, which I did, because I didn't want to put my parents in an awkward situation. At some point in the afternoon the kid found one of those plastic toddler toys, you know, the ones where they can sit on it and push themselves around, but it also has a handle at the back that toddlers can use as a walker. So he finds this toy and is running around this lawn full speed, ramming all the other kids. Now I did tell him nicely that it was not good to hurt the other little boys and girls, but he clean ignored me and carried on with his game, giggling and chasing the other kids. He also decided that I was now fair game, and I got rammed in the ankles and Achilles tendon a few times, and I'm fuming. His parents were watching and laughing the whole time. Eventually I'm done with this sheet, so I position myself in front of this small ditch, only about 1/4 inch deep and full of grass, and pull out my phone pretending to read messages. I was making myself an easy target for the little brat. He comes charging up behind me, aiming for my heels again. The front wheels go into the little ditch, stopping the walker. The kid was pushing it so fast that his momentum carried him right over the handlebars, right over the push toy and past me, faceplants in the dirt, going full scorpion. There was no blood, but he lay there and screamed blue murder. The best part was that the parents watched the whole thing take place, and they and the other parents never suspected that I stood in that exact spot for that exact reason. His parents were kind of pissed that the kid hurt himself while I was watching the kids, but they couldn't say anything, so they just kept the boy close the rest of the day. TLDR. Professor fails spoilt son. Back in engineering school, one of my classmates was the son of one of our professors. Now, this professor was a really nice dude. He paid attention to his students, his classes were fun, and he rarely failed anyone. His son, on the other hand, was a total shat, rude and nasty, and would always brag about how his dad was a highly senior professor with tenure. "You know who my dad is, right?" was literally his catchphrase. He wasn't even a good student. We rank GPAs out of 10, and he was a 4. This professor actually taught a very specialized course, so we only had about 2 courses from him in our entire time at the school. This course in our 5th semester was a bit complicated. If you didn't do regular study, it was easy to fail, but if you practiced the stuff, passing it was a breeze. So finals come around, and a shat is out there bragging that he didn't need to study because his dad will pass him anyway. He took this confidence all the way to the exam hall, and then the results were out. He had scored 7 out of 100. We know because the professor called us all to the classroom and displayed his answer sheet on the projector. According to him, he was the third student who had failed in his 20-year teaching career and he couldn't be more disappointed that it was his son. The amount of verbal as whooping a shat received was enough to have him quivering like a wet cat in front of everyone. The next time he pulled the "Do you know my dad?" card, the standard answer he received was, "The one who failed you." He stopped pretty soon after that point. He retook the exam the following year, failed again and had to drop out. Wherever he is today, I hope he learned his lesson. Worked at a fast food place across the street from a very big university for 8.25 an hour 4 years. Worst one I ever saw was a pretty little white blonde girl. They are infinite around here, literally in the middle of our restaurant on a cell phone. I noticed she was getting redder and redder in the face and being super animated over the course of a few minutes as she was standing in line, and then all of a sudden she is screaming at the top of her lungs so loud her face was strawberry red. I need my $500 early this week. I talked to that bitch you married about it already. Tell your guy to get that money in there now. I have a party I need to go to tonight. She whirls around at the two guys in line in front of her and demands she be allowed to cut them because she was, apparently, I'm in a faking hurry to get to the bank. They deny her, which sends her into another age. Fuck. This whole bullshit university. I faking hate it. I wish I would have went to New York. She jumps into easily a $30,000 Corvette and shoves it into reverse. She pulls out into the aisle of cars and then puts it in drive, loses control of the car, and hops a divider, basically beaching her car with its super lower clearance on the thing. The back wheels get traction just enough for the car to suddenly lurch backwards and the whole front bumper rips off and extends enough to detach from the body of the car, but not totally off of the car to let her go anywhere. Gets out, starts slamming her fists in the hood. She is screaming so loud I can hear her through the thick glass that separates us from the outside parking lot. And like clockwork erupts truck to hit a puddle next to her and faking drench her with water from about her hip down to her legs, and she was wearing a skirt. She only partially moved herself away from the water and started screaming. I get off in 15 minutes from her little episode, but stay at work for the next 2 hours watching her have a breakdown as the tow truck shows up to get her car off the median, and, what I can assume is a boyfriend, picks her up in an equally expensive car with a towel in the front seat so she doesn't mess up his interior. The moment he got out of the car, she starts screaming at him for making her wait almost an hour to come and get her, and he just looks 100% defeated. I sat there with a cherry Fanta and watched it all from a window. I'm sure daddy paid for it all, but hey, it was entertaining. My older brother is a bit of a brat, always has been, and now he's 44. He got a good job by lying on his resume, his application, and in his interview. He has a criminal past, nothing serious. He was arrested for not paying his tickets and driving on a suspended license, not drugs or violence. He worked for this company for about 3 months when he was found out. Not sure how. I know I didn't tell them. When they confronted him with the arrest report or whatever evidence they had, he tripled down on his lying and said his identity had been stolen and used by me. We look nothing alike. They had his mugshot. It didn't help his case that his boss found the busted magazine he was in. Not sure if everyone has this. It's a magazine with all local mugshots in it. They pay part of your bail if you let them print it. I found out because his accusations were heard by a family friend and he called me and told me that this is a big time accusation and a felony. I have since cut contact with him. Okay, back to his job. They knew better and didn't even let him take his possessions from his desk. A security guard boxes it up and they escorted him out. I wish I had seen it. We were told he was crying and screaming about how ex-cons like me just want a chance to live. So I had to keep in mind his arrest for driving violations and all misdemeanors. He was only in jail for about 2.5 hours till he made bail. He's not a hardened criminal. He's 44 with a ratty beard and a beer gut. Not even a dad bod. He bullied me my whole life. He still tried to talk bad about me to other family members at a last family reunion 4 years ago. I'm 41 and I was standing there. He's pathetic and believes everyone loves him and thinks he's perfect when we all see him for what he is. Sad guy who peaked in high school, then got into a bad marriage and ran away from her into the army. He served, I served too, yet he talks like he's the only one who did. Says I don't know what he's been through. We were enlisted during the same time point. I do feel kinda bad for his 2 boys, because his wife is just like him. I pray they don't end up like them. Thanks for the silver. That's the very first award I've been given for a comment. First, I'd like to thank the Reddit gods for giving me a voice. Next, I'd like to thank my slacker brother for giving me years of grief as a younger sibling. Lastly, I'd like to thank Jeffrey Epstein for not killing himself. I love you all. This is a sad one. My uncles have 3 girls. The 2 oldest ones are in college and the youngest is in middle school, 13. Being the youngest, they spoiled her. If she wanted the moon, they would bring her galaxies. At age 11 she had expensive MacUpen clothing. She had every toy possible and the newest iPhone. My uncles have money, they can pay for this stuff. However, little girl was a brat of the worst type. She hated hanging out with my sister, who is the same age as her, because we were the poor of the family. Not a lie lol, but that's mean as fuck. Little cousin had been kicked out of 5 schools before reaching 12 and my uncles just didn't have a fuck. Our families didn't intervene because that was a problem between her and her parents, thing I found disturbing because her behavior was starting to cause big problems. The girl would run away from school and turned into a bully to the point she has court citations. But little princess does no harm in her parents' eyes. Well, a few weeks ago I was driving around town when I saw Brat Queen outside school smoking with some older kids. These kids are high school age. Some high school dropouts, and she was dressed older than she is. Think short skirt, heels, Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. I got alarmed and tried to handle the situation as best as I could, asking her if she wanted a ride. She said no, and her friends threatened me to kill me. No problem. I knew they were bluffing. I called my uncles and told them what was happening. They said I was lying because Brat Queen could never do such thing. Fast forward the quarantine week that started 4 days ago, and Beat Queen ran away with her 18-year-old boyfriend Aka. Pedophile. She was found in a motel with the creep drinking and doing drugs and saying her parents hate her because they don't give her the sheet she wants. Her parents say this is just her rebel streak and she will be fine. Guys, I'm seriously concerned. I tried reporting this to CPS, but they say there is no problem since the child is healthy and has been. Guys, I'm concerned on how she's going to spiral out of control. Life will hit her harder than a brick to the face. Many years ago, a guy in a Porsche Targa got pissed at an accident scene. FDNY had a truck on the shoulder and NYPD and a trooper were holding the road so the tow operator could drag the car up an embankment. The tow cables were stretched and all the stuff was ready to go. I was standing next to the trooper. We had just done the paperwork of the driver of the wreck who was deceased, and in the minivan, this guy in shorts and a Tommy Bahama shirt comes straight at the trooper screaming about the tie-up and how he has business and he lost more money waiting than the trooper made that year. The trooper calmly tells him to get back in his car or he will be arrested. The douche walks back to his car and we continue to finish the paperwork. About 3 minutes goes by and we hear an engine rev up hard and tires squeal. I ducked behind the trooper car and the NYPD cops are screaming at everyone to get out of the way. Dickhead guns his Porsche to go across the road. He took off past us about 300 yards from where the car was stopped, flying along maybe 45 miles per hour. The FDNY guy tackles the tow truck operator and they roll under the tow truck right as Dick in Porsche hits the tow truck cables. The cable was run down and back from a delivery van. The driver had probably fallen asleep at the wheel of the van was down the embankment where you come off the Whitestone Bridge. The Porsche was almost cut in half. The cable was in the engine. The car stretched the cable at least 150 feet like instantly, but the tow truck was a huge kind that pulls tractor trailers and it didn't move. The cable was like a saw. When everything came to rest, the Porsche driver had to be cut out of the car. He was in very bad shape. Broken back and pelvis was in an open book fracture. I don't think he ever walked again, all because he was too good to wait with everyone else. As we're loading the guy in the bus to run him to the air, the trooper says, wonder what this is going to cost him. Stock market just opened. He had a good laugh walking back to his car when a cop or firefighter or paramedic says, hold up, it's for a good reason. We don't want to be there either. My dad's story, not mine. But my uncle was spoiled all his life. Well, my daddy was liked by his parents, but he wasn't one of the favorites. To give you a sense of how bad this guy was, he used to make my dad do his chores, and if he didn't he would get beat up for it, and his mom nor dad won't do anything, because my dad and his uncle had 7 sisters. And he would be left doing chores and hard work, teaching himself how to work hard, and not relying on other people, unless he needed help from them. Well, later in life my dad and my uncle had a car together. I think it was a Ferrari or something 70 maybe, don't remember the full details. But my dad was fixing it up all day without his brother's help so that he can take his girlfriend at the time to the airport, because she would be leaving back to Germany. He was working on it all day, and whenever he was about to take it out, my uncle told him no, he can't go, he hasn't finished all of his stuff yet. Just say my dad was at his greatest shape in the 80s, which is when the story took place. He was able to bench press 500 pounds in high school, and he was a wrestler for 5 years. Basically a guy won't wanna freak with. Well, my uncle fricked around with him, and he took the keys out of the car and stood with them. My dad told him he's been working all day on the car and he deserves to take it out. My dad and my uncle both owned the car, and it was in both their names. And no, you're not going to finish the rest of your chores. Basically talk to him like a child. But he was in his 20s to 30s point. After he was finished beating the crap out of him, my dad told my uncle he was gonna die, but a old man. He did not have anywhere to stay after that, so he asked his mom and dad if he could stay with them, and he told him if he had to spend another second with my uncle he was going to kill him. My grandpa understood and let him stay with them. Over the next 30 years of my uncle's life he was caught selling drugs in West Virginia and doing a lot of illegal stuff. He got old into his 60s and not having any good work ethic, he did die without his family, his friends, and alone, and an old man, like my dad said. So I think karma got the best of him. Edit. I talked to my dad, and he said that there was a friend there that tried to help my uncle overpower my dad, but my dad gave him a warning and he did not touch my dad, and just let my dad beat the crap of my uncle. I apologize if this is too long for some. There will be a TLDR at the end. I'm a part of a program where you can take college classes and get credits for them while still in school. I'm currently in 11th grade and these classes honestly aren't too hard to take. So far, I've passed every single one of them, and it's been nice to know that since I passed, I won't have to worry about taking them when I actually get to college. Well, the program is open to anyone who's in 11th and 12th grade. This entitled girl, who's a senior and almost 20 years old, somehow gets into the program. I already knew what to expect when she got in. C. She's the type of person who expects other people do to her work for her, even if it's as simple as copying down notes from the board, and if you don't do it for her, she'll stir up shit. Either that or make up a million excuses on why she can't do it herself. Her once go-to excuse was, "My cousin is pregnant, and I'm so stressed you don't understand what I'm going through." This was a reoccurring excuse she used for just about everything, until I called her out in the middle of class for it, and she hasn't used it since. Well, since I was one of the students who had been in the program the longest, she comes to me with about 5 million questions. How do I upload a document? How do I type this? How do I find the right page? You know, stuff that should be pretty easy to find out on your own. Keeping my cool, I told myself I didn't mind it, and that it would be over soon, and I could go back to peaceful silence. However, about a day later, she comes up to me and asks, "Hey, my name, can you read through my paper? I don't know if I did it right and I want your help with it." I reluctantly agreed, just to get her to leave me alone, and my god, I wished I hadn't. It was like asking a 6-year-old to write an essay post. I like this college because blah, 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 and Harvard is one of the best and most interesting schools. I wish I could go there and be smart like everyone else. Now, if any of you know, you can't put shit like that in formal essays and whatnot. It sounds like trash, and ultimately, your professor is going to think you're a little kid. On top of it all, she had no proper in-text citations, nor did she have a proper works cited page. I told her all of this, and that her paper sounded like it was written by a child. She of course started getting defensive and saying that it was her first time writing an essay like this and that she was very inexperienced unlike me. For a class assignment, high school, our teacher would sometimes give us practice essays too, right, so we would know how to write a proper essay to our future college professors. She knew what she was doing point to make my suffering end. I gave her a website to use that would help her write better and help her with her citations. It turns out she didn't use them. She ultimately ended up getting kicked out of the college in the program for plagiarism and went home with a big fat 0 as her final grade point. TLDR. Entitled Girl Gets Kicked Out of College Program for High School Students Due to Plagiarism. Even after I offered her help on how to fix the problem, and she got defensive with me, ultimately refusing to take my advice. Apologies in advance for the length. Back in college/computer class, there was this student from India with a thick broken accent who began mouthing off to the teacher, who strongly resembled actor Kenneth Branagh. Student acted like a self-entitled know-it-all to the teacher in front of whole class of 30+ students, sort of like the Nemesis Brainiac from Dexter's Laboratory, despite clearly having no idea what he was actually doing. The teacher, who was Dutch with an at times dodgy accent himself, was a very patient man and clearly passionate about his role, never once lost his temper and kindly corrected the student on several occasions, trying to guide him along with everyone else. Point at the end of day 2 or 3, the teacher wanted everyone to create a certain spreadsheet with a slideshow presentation. A number of us struggling had to stay over until the instructor helped us succeed in understanding the process enough to go home and follow the assignment. Point the aforesaid student pompously announced he had finished the assignment all by himself. Teacher comes over to see his work, puts the presentation on the big screen for all of us to see. It had so many glitches, flashing lights, lines buzzing on the screen, loud sounds, you name it, and disorganized slides, like you wouldn't believe. To put it mildly, the finished presentation was like a psychedelic Saturday Night Fever dream trying to perform schizo on the landline sound effect tryouts, simultaneously pretending to do a salsa jazz dance routine while doing cartwheels on a mechanical rodeo bull. In short, it was all very wrong and embarrassingly horrid. Point, and yet the student cheekily maintains, "Look, I did it. I'm all done with the assignment." Teacher gently chided him, pointing out some of the areas that are wrong, but the student keeps saying back, "No, you don't understand, I did it / I'm all done." This turns into a back and forth, quiet argument until the teacher says your assignment is not correct because my slideshow clicks mouse repeatedly very rapidly for 10 seconds, producing a back-quoting sound loudly on the speakers. Doesn't sound like this. When I hit play, after recovering from being schooled by the teach, he later continues on his tirade, very defensively stating that the teacher doesn't know what he's talking about, spouting stuff like "I'm privileged, dressed like it too, yada yada yada," until the teacher, calmly yet firmly, raises his voice and tells him, "Listen to me, from one foreigner to another, your English stinks," and proceeds to further correct his latest attempt. This shut the guy up finally and put him in his place once and for all. Point after this, the student never showed his arrogant face again in his class. The teacher still remains one of my top favorites to this day, just for that very classy guy. I'm head teller in a rich area. Douche is a regular. He restricts his account so only managers can see. Thinks tellers will steal his info. Dude is always in a rush, super impatient, rude, selfish, cusses and borderline harasses us. He's demanding us to pay his bills. One staff helps him, but he demands a manager when she says she can't see his accounts. The managers are in a meeting, and I'm in charge, so I go, but I can't see past the restriction. The conversation goes like, "Douche, Jesus Christ, I'm in a rush, can you help me? She can't do what I want, you do it. Just transfer my money from X account to X account. How hard is that? Me, sir, I'm trying to help you, but I can't see past the restriction on your accounts. You lodged the restriction so only your home branch can help you. You'd have to go there to transfer, unless you can give me the account numbers." Douche, oh my god, do you think I know the account numbers? You're not able to help me. Can you do anything? Bring me a manager. I don't want to talk to you. I'm in a rush. Get me someone who can do what I want. This goes on. He doesn't want to listen, so I go to interrupt the managers. One of them comes out, and I explain the situation, when douche storms up behind me and interrupts douche. What's taking so damn long? Is this the manager? Help me out, I've been waiting forever. None of them can help me. You help me. My manager introduces himself and offers his hand for a handshake, but douche literally ignores it and storms to the teller. Manager follows and helps him while he's being a shitty ass. Manager explains douche will need a manager if he wants to see his accounts. Keep in mind, our bank values customer service. With rude customers we have a professional friendly face and can't say anything back. Manager has a loud voice and there's a lineup of people watching this entire exchange a few feet away. Douche, well alright then, I'll just always come to you, and you can help me. What's your name? Manager, loudly, my name is Manager. I told you that, and I tried to shake your hand earlier, but you walked away from me. I bit my lip to keep from laughing at the blunt sass in Manager's voice. Freaking douche actually stuttered. Then he looked embarrassed. Such a glorious moment. Douche got super quiet and was nicer for the rest of the exchange, apologizing again to Manager. Had a few run-ins with him again. I purposely take longer and always call the same manager if he demands one. This will be lost, but I worked a summer camp for a few years when I was young, and the trees were greener than the trees you get these days, and the grass was more potent. My final year, I was the assistant manager. I forget what the title was, events coordinator or something stupid like that. The camp had campers for 10 days, then 4 days off. Pay was given at the end of the 10 days, except your first pay also included the 4 days of training before the first campers came. I had nothing to do with hiring, but I figured Princess Peach Pit was going to be a problem. When it came to first day of training, she was about as useful as a handsaw on a space shuttle, and as bright as a candle with no wick. When she found out that counselors had to do some light cleaning after campers ate, she nearly had a conniption fit. I found out that she got the job because mom and dad were good friends of the CEO of the organization that ran the camp, and they wanted her to have some real world experience before she went off to university. Well, we made it work. She got easy to deal with campers, had the most experienced partner, and the only downside for her was the events coordinator kept a close eye on her to make sure she did her fair share of the work. On the last day of camp, the campers left, and the head of the camp had to leave early, so had me distribute the pay envelopes. So I do so. Staff of 30, took no time, then went to the office to finish off the paperwork. There's a knock at the door. It's Princess Peach Pit. My pay is wrong. I'm sorry to hear that. Unfortunately, head had to leave early, so it's something we'll make sure is corrected on the next check. What is the problem? It's short by like $300. I don't think I got paid for the training. What? I'm supposed to make $9/HR at 80 hours plus 4 days training, which comes to over $1,000. This check is for less than $700. I have plans for this money, and if I don't get it, I will sue. I wanted to say welcome to the real world. I wanted to say, oh my sweet summer child, why couldn't you have been taken by the fairies, as this world isn't for you. What I did say was okay, so after income taxes are deducted, that sounds about right. What followed was a declaration that we had no right to take taxes from her. I suggested she should write to the Prime Minister and perhaps talk to her parents about her course from here, but there was nothing I could do to help her. I did hope she wouldn't return in a fit of pique, but she did come back and worked the rest of the summer, and she never sued the organization. I wish I could've seen the look on his face, but he wasn't allowed near me. When I was 7, I had a friend of the same age who had a little, 3, half-sister and an older, 14, brother. Pretty much, long story short, he made me take off my swimsuit and tried to grope me. My dad almost beat him to a pulp, and the only reason anyone knows is because he made my little brother stand outside the door and make sure no one came in. He looked, told my parents, and his sister told my parents that he isn't allowed to play that game. Friend's mum and stepdad ask him what he was doing, and he says that he was teaching me swear words while my swimsuit was hanging off my waist. Dad calls CPS and the police, who don't show up, but CPS did a welfare check and found nothing unordinary. Since we were in a rural town, there was only one school that we both attended, and while the school was not willing to kick him out, they were willing to take adequate measures to ensure he wasn't allowed near any of my siblings or me. Well, he would keep his distance, but he was one of those kids that pretended to shoot anyone that he didn't like. That's what happened. My brother told my parents this, and that he was trying to get close to me. Also true. While this was happening, his parents were constantly at our house, knocking on doors and windows, and trying desperately to defend their son. My parents took his threats to the school, who notified the police, and his parents straight to the police. Suffice to say, they were not as accommodating to him, or his parents, as my school was. For a while, I worked at a warehouse that would bring in temporary workers for different busy periods. When this happened, they would separate them, and each one of us regulars would take a group and teach /lead /supervise whatever. It was really hard work and very little rest time on the clock. Quite a few of the temp workers would quit. My groups, however, would always go above and beyond. I would challenge them to outwork me and would treat the whole thing like a competition. I liked it, they liked it, and obviously my bosses liked it. One of my coworkers missed time due to sickness, and his group got divided up between the rest of us. My boss told me one of the temp guys was coming to me, and he was a rare breed of Winnie brat. Challenge accepted. I was disappointed, yet proud of what happened. I didn't get to whip this kid into shape at all. The people who'd been working with me the past few weeks did it all for me. When he would lag behind, they all would be on him to get it together. When he complained, the entire group drowned him out with a mix of mockery and rough encouragement. He was completely disrespectful to everyone he encountered, and I could see why they sent him to me. My crew washed him out. He showed up the next day and just shook my hand. He apologized and said he just couldn't do this, and thanked me for everything. Turns out he was a relative of someone high up in the company, and that this was a planned rude awakening for him. It helped to get my leadership skills noticed, and I got promoted. I got to hire some of the temp guys to come on full time and become leads, like I had been for them. One of the few times I had faith in a company and got to witness them taking care of the actual workers. 70 or so employees were transferred from a small Canadian province to a big city out west. We moved from an area with one Walmart to a very large metropolitan area. It was a voluntary move to establish a new call center. Most of the people who accepted the transfer were young and without kids. We all knew that we could be the future supervisors and managers. Karen was about 21 years old then. She had lived at home her entire life, subtly letting us know that she wanted to live a good life, to show respect to her parents, because her sister was a drug addict and such a disappointment. Now, this was the fall of 2001. Google was relatively new, and most people didn't have their own computer, and this was pre-iPhone. Also, we were on edge, having to fly back and forth while finding places to live. 9/11 happened in the early stages of moving, and nobody really felt comfortable flying. Karen made the transfer. She was on my team. She made the move with her stoner boyfriend, who she kept calling her fiancé, but he never got the hints to put a ring on it. So they move into an apartment together and make tons of phone calls to arrange stuff and cable and everything. Her first apartment. Her first time not living at home. Crisis #1. The people in the apartment upstairs walk around at night. No, this isn't Riverdance, but she could hear them and was appalled at how inconsiderate they were, walking around after 10:30 p.m. Stoner boyfriend didn't think it was that bad. If he didn't know that she was high maintenance before they moved across the country and started living together, he surely knew it now. The landlord quickly grew tired of her complaining and said that she should call the police if she really thought they were excessive. She asked us if she should call the police and we all said no. Crisis #2. I'm at my computer working away. Jess, our supervisor, is seated next to me. The computers were advanced enough in 2001 that we had an office messaging program. Karen comes in, looking like someone had stolen all of her candy and pulled her hair and said mean things about her mommy. Jess, what's wrong, Karen? We got our first phone bill. Jess, and Karen, I didn't know calling directory assistants costs money. I almost sprain my eyes while I roll them. Karen, still in shock, describes how the bill is twice what they expected because they called DA a lot. Friend Ally and the rest of the team are seated farther away. They can't hear Karen, but they can see she's devastated and not doing any work. Ally messages me, "What's wrong with Karen?" I reply, "She got her first phone bill and it's double what she expected. She didn't know directory assistant costs money." Ally, lol. Jess is trying to get Karen to buck up and turn on her computer. I can tell that Karen is ramping up to go from traumatized to a hissy fit. Karen, I have never had to pay a bill in my entire life. It's my first bill ever. Jess, you don't say. I message Ally, it's her first bill ever. Karen, my car loan payments come directly out of my account every month. There is no bill. I message Ally, her car payments are auto debit and she's never received a bill before. Ally, I'm sharing this info with Trina and Mark. Me, she's traumatized by a phone bill. Karen, they should have told me that they were charging me per phone call. Jess, I know that you're upset and this is all new to you, but I need you to start. Karen, this is outrageous and I shouldn't have to pay it. Jess, it's a service that everyone has to pay for and I need you to turn on your computer. And Karen, I'm going to call my dad. I message Ally, she has to call daddy. Jess' head is going to explode. Ally, how much does each call cost? Me, 35 cents. I'm a first year med student and in my group we were 11 people. Normally, the maximum should be 10 people per group. There is this girl, we'll call her L, who at first was like any regular student. The only thing that was more special about her was the fact that she is a year older than all of us because she didn't pass the entrance exams a year before. Now, we are a few weeks in, and one day during a lecture the prof calls her out. She wasn't present, and says that her student ID number is the same as of another student from a different group. From there on we start figuring out, over the course of a few months, that she has been lying to us all along. She was never accepted into the university. She was the real example of fake it till you make it. The thing is, she is from a different city and the university is in the capital. Her parents are filthy rich NGL, so they could have easily paid for her education, but she claimed that she got in because she managed to get very good grades on the entrance exams. Sometimes she would skip classes so she could go on apartment tours because her parents had promised to buy her an apartment for getting into med school. However, word got around and her parents found out that she's been lying to them and milking them for money. She rode a cab a few times a day, ate out for lunch and dinner, went to fancy restaurants and clubs. She said that on a daily basis she normally spends about $150 to $200. After this she went through a drastic change. Her parents forced her to go back to their city. They barely give her any money, they don't let her out, and have her study 24/7. As far as I know she is pretty much under house arrest. I don't know if brat is the correct term as we were teenagers, about 16. Here in AU, 18 is the legal drinking age, but my parents didn't mind me having a few drinks at a party because I wasn't a wild child. A few of my friends' parents had similar attitudes for their kids too. So my best friend was having a birthday at his sister's place, and it was mainly a few friends from school. Except the spoiled obnoxious kid who sometimes bullied turned up. Some people were okay with him, others got headaches from rolling their eyes so hard. Spoiled kid goes on about how lame the party was, decides to go get more alcohol, returns with a case of UDLs. For non-Australians, it's basically cans of premixed drinks, things like vodka and lemon, vodka and watermelon, lolly water basically, and makes this big song and dance about only sharing them with people who like him. I could care less. At school he was always a dickhead to me and a few others, so I knew I was off his list, but my friend's sister let me hide my drinks away from others. So spoiled kid starts on me, ignore it. Then he starts on how lame the party is, how the venue was rubbish, and that if it was his party it would be at his massive house with better music and better food and drinks. I thought it was very generous of my best friend's sister to allow her place to be used, so I took issue and had words. Spoiled kid got more obnoxious. He certainly couldn't blame alcohol. He might have been able to get it, but the way he was drinking was the way a child reacts when they first taste coffee or beer. Tried to ignore him and walk away. He followed being more obnoxious, and I just punched him in the face and yelled, "Shut the fuck up." I had a moment of regret cause he was slightly bigger than me, but he held his face, his lip quivered, and he ran off. Man, it felt good. I drive a 16-year-old Jeep. It's my daily driver, but it occasionally needs some love. There is a shop in my town that only works on Jeeps, and that is where I take it if it needs something. I had it in getting the water pump replaced and was picking it up. There was a kid, maybe 18 to 20, in front of me talking to the guy behind the counter. His dad was with him, and his dad said something, and the kid was pretty rude and hateful to his dad. "Shut up, Dad, I know what I want them to do. Just stay out of it." The guy behind the counter stopped and looked at the kid and asked him, "Did you buy your Jeep?" The kid said, "It's mine." "Yeah. That's not what I asked. I asked if you bought that Jeep, or did your dad buy it for you?" The kid was dead silent. The guy behind the counter asked also, "Did you spend $3,700 of your hard-earned bucks on these mods we may be installing?" More silence. "Are you going to be the one paying the $2,000 in labor fees for the installation?" More silence. "I didn't think so. So how about you turn around, apologize to your dad for being disrespectful, and then I might consider doing business with him. But we don't do business with people that don't show respect to their parents." The kid scowled and the guy behind the counter just crossed his arms and waited. It took about 20 seconds, but the kid finally turned around and mumbled, "Sorry." It was one of the best things I'd seen in a while. I was just grinning the whole time watching it. This girl didn't get her full just desserts, but I at least helped prevent her from getting what she wanted. TLDR, spoiled girl threatens to kill herself if my roommate, her friend, and I don't somehow let her live with us, despite her intentionally missing the application window. She didn't get into the apartment, but still manipulated the university into forcing someone out of their dorm, so she could have her own room. My roommate in college and I decided to move out of the dorms for our second year. We originally invited 2 other friends, Jay and, spoiled girl, SG, to live with us in a 4-bedroom. Jay ended up getting really sick and transferring to another university. SG said she wanted to live in the dorms. My roommate and I said okay and signed our lease papers. The leases were individual and the apartment had 3 bedrooms, so we could request to choose the 3rd roommate during the application process, but in the end we didn't get to choose the 3rd person. 5 months go by, and it's time for SG to choose her dorm room. She was set on having a single room in the upperclassman dorm. She didn't choose it during her scheduled time, so all of the single rooms got filled up. She got placed in a double, shared room, just like she had for the previous year. She threw a fit and had her mom call the leasing office to see if the 3rd room in my apartment had been taken. The leasing office gave out that information without consulting with my roommate and I later called and gave them an earful for that, because the reason I moved to a university far from home was because I was stalked/harassed/threatened by a man in my previous town. Upon receiving that information, SG started telling my friend she was going to kill herself if we didn't somehow get her that room. The application process had ended 5 months ago. My roommate didn't want to tell her no, but also didn't want her living there. I told the leasing office what was happening and that it's very dangerous to give out personal information without permission from the tenant. They confirmed that she wouldn't be able to get a lease, and if she somehow managed, they wouldn't allow her to be placed with my roommate, and I eventually SG suspected her threats weren't going to work. She and her parents went to the housing office and claimed she had mental disorders that prevented her from sharing a room with other people. She has no diagnosed mental disorders, but her family is wealthy, so I assume that's how they got around supplying paperwork for their claim. Since there were no more single rooms available, the housing office kicked another student out of her dorm, so SG could have it. My roommate and I were really close, but when she kept bringing SG to the apartment after all of this, I ended our friendship. I saw it hit a brat and his parents. I taught at this upper crust college prep school. We had a lot of brats, but they were mostly good kids. Our admin was also not one to give in to parent pressure or coddle the students. which I was very thankful for. So this kid I'll call he is a senior and a total dick. Like the kind of dick that even the other kids hate. He was a gymnast and on some kind of national team that occasionally feeds into the Olympics or something. I kind of tuned him out when he talked about it. He decided because he was going to be an Olympian he didn't need to do work, and his parents fully supported him. At multiple conferences they told me that his grades didn't matter, he's an athlete. His parents were also completely loaded, both drove Teslas back when they were first available, lived in a walled mansion, the works so it's spring, and he has failed literally every class his senior year. I'm helping coordinate cap and gown pickup for graduating seniors and he and his parents show up. They want to know why they can't find his graduation packet. I tell them it's because he isn't graduating. They are shocked. They tell me they have family flying in from abroad to watch he graduate. They are starting to make a scene so my VP and I move them to an adjoining room where we explain because he's failed everything, he can't graduate. He is crying by this point and his dad has turned a shade of red I've never seen on a human. His parents tell us they didn't think we were serious all year about he failing. They literally cannot understand why we won't let him graduate. His mom starts complaining that they have this huge party planned for him. The best part was his dad offers to write a huge check to the school if we will let him graduate, and my VP says, and we appreciate your donation, but he still won't walk that stage. I guess they did wind up working a deal with the admin free to take online classes and graduate. But this all happened 3 years ago, and as of this year he hasn't completed his courses and is still not an Olympic athlete. Maybe not exactly what the question is asking, but my ex-best friend kid was always entitled and pretty spoiled. Can't lie, I was too until a few years back. I learned, however, about the real world real quick, and every one of the faking bullshit consequences it had. This guy though, he never listened to me when I said sheets to him. Still doesn't. The guy always thought that if he apologized he could make everything okay. My oh my, he found out the damn hard way that he was wrong. At the time, I was in an online relationship, which I learnt afterward was bullshit, and everything was mostly going well. Until I decided to tell this dude some little secrets and anecdotes that no one was supposed to know. I had checked with my GF, who said it was fine if I trusted him. I did. Big mistake. So I tell this guy these things and tell him do not tell anyone about this. Little did I know that I got a DM from him asking me if he could say something to a friend. I couldn't respond to this and didn't even know I had got it until after my automotive class had wrapped up. We weren't permitted phones for many reasons, so I come out of my class and check my phone and tell him no, I've already tell you not to tell anyone. So everything goes fine. He told me he didn't tell anyone. Then I get a text. It's from my GF. It reads, did you tell anyone about what I told you? Confused, I replied no, only who I trust. Why? Then the next text I receive reads, well, someone found out. Immediately I suspect this guy. My exact words to him were, speak with me now. The next 20 minutes of my day were spent listening to this dude talk out of his ass about how sorry he was and then sorting all the mess he made with my relationship and life out. It took me weeks to get everything back together. Right as it started getting back together, I get another DM. This guy had told the friend he told originally to go ahead and try and sort out the mess on his end, and he had told the person that told my girlfriend about it. Another dumbest thing. Then I spent 10 minutes of my time after that hearing both my ex-best friend and his friend apologize out of their asses at me. Couple days later, when she'd calmed mostly down, I get a DM from my ex-best friend. It's a link to a YouTube video. Thinking of nothing, I click it. Ah, lovely gnome video. So I then go back to him. He then starts reading off my faking information back to me and then tells me that the link he used was an IP tracker and my faking router was then tracked. Again, more apologies ensue. What ended up happening was I blocked him for 3 days and demoted him and his friend on my, at the time, quite large server on Discord, 35 plus members active. He was not added back to admin team until a year later. He spent the majority of that time, allegedly, trying to make it up to me in some way, or trying to think of some way to make it up to me. As of now, I have never clicked any link from him or his friend since the IP tracking incident. He is back in admin and is now a co-leader on my server, and his friend is admin as well. The server is pretty insignificant in member count, but still is a huge part of all of our lives. I broke it off with the girl I was dating and haven't talked to her since. I'm in a much more stable and committed relationship now and couldn't be happier with it. My ex-best friend learned the hard way that apologizing doesn't revert consequences of serious actions, and I still do not trust him to say anything secretive at all to him to this day, nor anyone except my current GF. Thanks to the few that probably read this. 3. A friend of mine is currently realizing her decisions in the past few years are coming with heavy consequences, yet still not willing to do what she needs to do to survive. She has a fashion degree, and I met her when she was fresh out of school at a job at a theme park doing stocking overnight. She would constantly say how the job was beneath her and that she needed something better. She lasted 4 months and quit because her estranged dad came back into her life and tried to pay for her rent and stuff as a way of saying sorry. She's jumped through many jobs because she became unhappy, and while I do think you shouldn't stay at a job if you're super unhappy, I do believe you should have a backup plan and a strategy, which my friend never had. And her dad wasn't always on time with payments, so she would freak out sometimes about not being able to pay her rent on time. She still tried to do her fashion stuff on the side, but it's a very difficult business to get into, and she apparently would work for shady people who would pay her months after she finished a project in which it taught her a lesson to demand payment first. She would openly admit she had no savings and didn't think it was really necessary, so obviously that came to bite her in the ears a couple months ago when she left yet another job that made her unhappy, and this whole virus thing became an issue. Her dad currently can't help her as he's not earning any money, and apparently her family is wealthy but refuses to help her for some reason. My mom literally offered her a room here at my house so she wouldn't be alone in her apartment, because her roommates all left before the lockdown was issued in our area, as well as being too able to provide her with food as well, but she insists on staying there at her apartment. I have so many stories. The main 3 that come to my mind are: when I was a junior in high school, I had an aggressions class with the freshman queen bee. Her family was loaded, and she got everything handed to her, including good grades. Our teacher wasn't having any of her sheet. The entire class had to sit there and watch as she screamed at him for failing her. His response: "I didn't fail you, you failed yourself. Now go sit down before you get ice." In school suspension, she didn't pass the class, but I hope she finally woke up a bit. I don't have much hope though. My ex-roommate's mom had married into money, so her step-family paid for everything. Her step-grandparents paid every cent for her to go to the most expensive college in the state, because that's just where she wanted to go, even though she didn't have a declared major or any plans for her life. She flunked out after the first year because she preferred partying and sleeping around instead of going to class. They then paid for her to go to a local community college, and once again, she flunked out for the same reason. Now she's been cut off from everything. Not as extreme, but my younger brother-in-law is the kind of teenager who will try some new things, but will immediately quit if he isn't absolutely gifted at it. All he does all day is play on his phone or Xbox. I'm a ceramics student, and I spend pretty much all day practicing the craft. This kid comes in and grabs some clay, then starts complaining that he can't make a simple ball, then just walks away talking about how he thought it would be easy. No. I've been doing this for a long time. I know the rules of clay and how the material works. You can't just pick it up and expect to make a museum-worthy piece instantly. Things take time, effort, practice, and patience. I think he finally learned that. My dad's egotistical as shit, so thought all my issues were totally not his fault and just needed therapy to fix. Sent me to an abusive therapy school in Utah. Thing is, these programs are ridiculously expensive, especially considering the low quality, and so most of the students there were pretty well off, often spoiled. So I have quite a few stories from their point. The person I hated the most, Jeff, was klepto but got away with it all the time because he was babied to shit. Eventually took a blind man's walking stick who was in the bathroom when we were about to hike. Jeff didn't learn. He was scum of the earth, but he did have to deal with everyone criticizing him for it. Point there was another student, Justin, that was really sexually creepy. He had turned 18 and groped another student who was probably about 16. Cops got involved and Justin got his comeuppance because of a 2-year age difference. Other student was also gay, which was how it was rumored to be consensual, but the age made that not matter. There was a guy named Derry that ran our Pathfinder group, similar game to Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of us stopped playing because he could be a controlling ass. I got some other RPGs on a humble bundle and a group of us planned to try them out. Stuff had previously agreed with Eri and I, whichever group got there first could, of the big table, no schedule needed. We played on the floor when Eri used it, but then my roommate got the Star Wars RPG set up before Eri one day. So he got there and Eri had been planning to play at that time. We told him that he could play on the floor just like us. He flipped his sheet and got restrained by staff. We were pretending not to laugh the whole time, but had to play on the floor because we couldn't move his stuff for him during the situation. Point another student, Tyler, is my favorite story though. Tyler was a pretty standard fuckboy. He loved basketball, was pretty boring otherwise, and hated following rules when he didn't feel like it. When we went on a quarter abroad in Thailand, we were testing this. Our school was the first of its sort to do any sort of international trips. He was rude to staff and a pain the whole time. Staff had as much trouble with him as Zev, the other idiot that didn't shower, was violent and made up contradictory stuff in the same sentence. Tyler kept complaining that the program director said that he could go into the city alone. He didn't. He ended up calling a hooker to his hotel room when we went to Bangkok. My best friend was Tyler's closest on the trip, so he told the two of us to occupy Zev because the two of them roomed together that night. We pretended to be okay with it and went straight to a staff who was, of course, Mormon. Tyler almost got in big trouble but cancelled it in time to not get punished too severely. Point. After we got back, Tyler kept up the sheet. He had graduated high school, but not the program during the summer quarter, and kept saying that meant that he didn't have to follow any rules, this being at the apartments for higher level students that had much more freedom. He ended up spending the night at his girlfriend's house and simply texting staff who told him he had to come back, "I'm an adult," as reasoning for not having to obey. He got kicked out of the apartments back into the shared houses, had all his privileges stripped, and ended up signing himself out. He was 18, 2 weeks before leaving. Because of this, he was stuck in rural Utah with his parents no longer supporting him. I don't know what happened to him, but I'm pretty sure he learned his lesson. Don't fight with authority when they are holding perfectly reasonable standards, and I say that as someone that hated the program and is a libertarian. For so long. I remember 2 years ago I worked in a court as admin. I was 24 and a girl started the same day as me. I just assumed she was the same age as me. Really. Point. We got to talking and I immediately had a sense she was entitled. She instantly mentioned how she lives at home and her mother does all her washing for her. I mentioned how I live with my partner, etc. and she was for some reason really surprised by this. I noticed over the next coming weeks the issues she caused in the office. Every single movement or task she was required to do was let out with a huge, drawn out sigh and an eye roll. Point. I'm talking basic requirements of our role. Things that were just commonly expected of us. Or if she was asked to get something off the printer, she'd make a long show of getting up and flouncing off. Point. Everyone seemed to bite their tongue. I remember our section had to take shifts in answering the phone, 1 hour each. Point. I started mine at 12 p.m. She was due to take over at 1 p.m. So she had her lunch during me being on the phone. Point. I looked up and noticed it was 1:05 p.m. and I'd not had lunch yet. She was sitting opposite me with her earphones on and eating. I'm really shit at being direct with people. Low-key fear of confrontation of any kind, lol. So lightly asked her if she could take over for me. Point. She eventually looked up, tucked her earbud out and said, "Oh, I'm still eating?" and continued listening to music. I glanced around and everyone was giving me an awkward look. I asked her again, and she gave me the same throwaway response with some attitude thrown in. I gently reminded her it's now past her time to start the phone, and I need lunch. She kept dismissing me until our boss intervened and told her to start using the phone now. She finally did, but sighed and I rolled again. I then remember how we were strictly prohibited from using our phones at all in any way, unless it was during break. Like most admin jobs are pretty slack, but this was strict due to data protection. What with it being in a court, I'd just check my phone occasionally when I'd go pee. Lol. Anyway, everyone seemed to abide by this no problem. She would constantly use her phone. She even placed it in a file to try and disguise what she was doing. Lol. So the manager comes up to her and says, "I'm serious. I've told you a million times, get off your phone now." And she literally muttered, "Oh, for fuck's sake, fine." And my manager looked as if she was about to pop a fucking blood vessel. She was red with fury. Lol. Anyway, she literally lasted 2 months. How she did, I don't know. When she walked up to me and declared proudly she had handed her notice in, she would try to be friendly with me, and honestly I'm a tolerant person, but I simply did not like being near her for even more reasons than what I've listed. I say, "Hey cool, what will you be doing?" She shrugs and says, "Well, I don't know, but honestly, I don't even need this job, haha," and explains how she might just help out in her parents' shop. Oh, I just also remembered. So we had a little corner in the office where we'd all contribute snacks and biscuits. I gained a lot of weight. Lol. And if we'd pass, we'd pick up a biscuit or two. Anyway, of course she never once contributed. I watched in shock once where she went up to the communal snack thing, grabbed handfuls, literally handfuls of snacks, walked to her desk and shoved them in a drawer. We all witnessed in shock. Anyway, plot twist. Just before she left, she told me she'd be turning 31 next week and asked if I wanted to meet up for drinks. 31 years old. In college I was working in a place that made pita bread wraps, and it was a Saturday night. I was in the back doing dishes and heard a commotion outside. Went out and there was food everywhere and a table and chairs on the floor. Apparently the drunk frat boys who were there previously had tried hitting on a group of girls and got rejected, so the bigger guy in the group screamed in her face that he hoped that she and her friends got wrapped on their way home, and flipped a table and chairs and threw his food on the ground. My manager was the one who explained to me what had happened. He's my age. I told him I really wished that I wasn't on the clock. After they did that, he pointed to the register and said, "Clock out." Without missing a beat I clocked out and went outside. They were on the other side of the empty road. I yelled at them and told them that they had left a mess inside and that there was a group of girls they needed to come apologize to. The leader just called me a bussy and told me to go fuck myself or something. So I crossed the street and beat the absolute shit out of 3 spoiled, entitled, narcissistic frat boys from my school. Dragged the big one into the road once I wrestled out of his grip and held the back of his head down against the asphalt and beat him until he stopped fighting back. Then went after his friend and I don't remember what I did to him. The third one ran into the bushes once he woke up after I knocked him out. Walked back inside with a torn shirt and a few scrapes. The table full of girls stared at me and I smiled politely and went and clocked in and went back to finish the dishes. It's not really a spoiled brat story, but he still kinda thought he was better than others. There was this kid in 8th grade who was really strong, and I said some throwaway joke that he got all offended at. After class, I got up, and he straight up punched me right in the middle of the side of my face. Now, I'm small in build, and have that typical nerd look. I've even hot glasses and I know a bunch of random stuff, and I know that made me look weak to bullies, but I could take a hit. He threw a hell of a right hook, and even though he didn't say anything, I noticed the slightest hint of surprise on his face when I just got up and walked away. Normally, if I wasn't trying to one-up him, I would have sat there for a moment because my ears were ringing and my head was pounding, and afterwards, I was a little lightheaded. But I knew him and his buddies, thought I was weak, so, like a badass, instead of falling down and giving into his punch and falling down, I just stood there and took it. I didn't sit down after, I just turned and walked away with a straight face the whole time. Sure, not recoiling with the punch and instead just turning my head like in the movies made it hurt more, but I have an extreme tolerance for pain, so it was fairly easy to make it seem like I felt nothing. And I think taking the punch like a badass worked, because he never went after me again. If anything, I think we have some strange sort of respect for each other. I've seen him in the halls, and we just acknowledge that the other is there, but don't really say anything. The few words we've shared in the 3 years since have been completely unrelated to what happened, and was mainly just small talk when we were involved in a larger conversation in which we would have to speak. We've reached this weird middle ground. I don't hate him for what he did. I'm not by any means one who likes to show off, but I remember that moment fondly, because being the geek, or nerd, even a small amount of fame is hard to come by, so now I have some small amount of badassery that people like to talk about whenever he and I are in the same vicinity. And I've been told he doesn't hold grudges, so we are both over it, but we've never forgotten it either.